Hey everyone, tonight we are diving into a story that rewrites the very script of Resistance, a story where the ocean itself became an accomplice, and history's forgotten people carved out an empire in the shadow of imperial ambition. You know the narrative: ships, chains, plantations, and the relentless machinery of colonial profit. But tonight, you're not looking at the fields. You are looking at the sea. Imagine this with me. It is the year 1635. You are clinging to a jagged piece of driftwood, the salt spray whipping your face, tasting like despair and a faint metallic hope. Around you, the vast, terrifying darkness of the Caribbean Ocean has just claimed a Spanish slave ship, maybe two, maybe even three. Historians still argue whether the initial group came from one colossal wreck or a series of smaller disasters, but the outcome is the same. The vessels laden with human cargo men and women primarily from the Gold Coast and the Bight of Biafra, destined for the crushing labor of the Antilles, have been ripped apart by a furious squall off the coast of a rugged volcanic island. You struggle toward the shore, the sound of the surf deafening, the sand promising both salvation and an uncertain terror. You finally drag yourself onto the beach of the indigenous name for what the Europeans would later call St Vincent. Your lungs burn, your limbs ache. You look around, and in the uncertain light of the breaking dawn, you see not a welcoming party, but a few dozen others just as waterlogged and shell-shocked. You've escaped the immediate horror of the deep, but you know instinctively that you have just traded the horror of the sea for the danger of the land. This is the pivotal moment. This is the origin story of the Garifuna Pipola community, forged not in oppression but in defiance and a dramatic escape. Think about it. The journey across the Atlantic, the Middle Passage, was designed to break every physical and psychological bond. You were supposed to arrive docile, terrified, and isolated. But here, on this remote, untouched volcanic shore, you are suddenly free. And freedom, you quickly learn, is not a destination. It's a fight for survival against those who designed the chains in the first place. You probably wouldn't survive this first night, exposed and vulnerable, without the discipline and resilience of the people around you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe it, only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. Let's see how far this story travels tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you dry your tattered clothes and examine the jagged coastline, you begin to grasp the sheer improbability of your situation. The mainstream historical fact is that St. Vincent, along with Dominica, remained one of the last few Caribbean islands, unconquered by European powers throughout the 17th century, largely due to the fierce resistance of the native Kalinago. Now you, the shipwrecked African, are another variable tossed into this volatile mix. The great irony is that the very same geography that protected the indigenous population from European settlement will now, perhaps, offer you, the runaway, a shield as well. You might be wondering, why St. Vincent? Why here? The answer lies in the currents and the wind patterns, which had a nasty habit of pushing disabled ships toward the archipelago. It was an involuntary, chaotic act of fate. A quirky tidbit is that the Kalinago people themselves had a long, storied tradition of resistance and mobility. Having successfully rebuffed multiple colonization attempts, they were, in a way, the original island rebels. They were already experts at living off the island's interior, knowing its hiding places, its edible plants, and its dangerous animals. You are now stepping into their world, an unexpected, uninvited guest. You spend the first few days simply surviving, drinking rainwater, eating whatever shellfish you can pry from the rocks, and keeping a terrified watch on the dense tropical jungle that rises sharply behind the beach. You quickly realize that remaining on the coast is suicide. The occasional sighting of a European ship means instant re-enslavement or death. You have to move inland into the steep, mist-shrouded peaks, the heart of the island known only to the Kalinago. But moving inland means confrontation, and that is exactly what you prepare for. You start fashioning rudimentary tools and weapons from the wreckage and the stones you find. You are no longer just a group of broken refugees. You are quickly organizing into a disciplined, military-minded community driven by one singular purpose: retaining the freedom that the sea so violently granted you. This initial organization is key. and it demonstrates the inherent leadership and collective memory of resistance that traveled with you across the Atlantic. The European slavers thought they had erased your history. They were about to discover that history travels in the blood, not just on a manifest. This shared ordeal, the terror of the storm and the triumph of the shore, binds you together far stronger than any chain ever could. You understand that your existence here is a profound cosmic joke on the empires of the world. You were meant to be property, and now you are a problem, a self-governing entity arising from the very thing meant to destroy you. The decision is made. You must leave the vulnerable coastline. With a grim determination, you begin to ascend, following faint animal trails that lead up into the volcanic slopes of St Vincent. The humidity is oppressive, the jungle floor slick with perpetual rain and decaying foliage. Every step is an act of will, a fight against vines, insects, and the sheer verticality of the terrain. You trudge upward, carrying little more than the clothes on your back and the deep, silent trauma of the crossing. Then the inevitable happens. You round a bend in a narrow trail shaded by immense forest canopy, and you stop dead. Standing before you, silent and watchful, are the island Caribs, the Kalinago. They are lean, powerful, and armed with bows, arrows, and formidable long clubs. Their bodies are often stained with ruku, a reddish-orange pigment, giving them a fierce, striking appearance. This is the meeting on the shores, though slightly inland, and the tension is palpable. The very air seems to vibrate with mutual suspicion. From your perspective, they look like the owners of the land, and they are. They have successfully defended this territory against the pale-skinned invaders for generations. Now, a new group of outsiders, dark-skinned but speaking alien tongues, has appeared from the same direction as the enemy ships. For the Kalinago, you represent an unknown quantity, possibly an advance party for the Europeans, or perhaps just a disruption. The Kalinago communicate through sharp, guttural phrases, demanding to know who you are and what your intentions are. Since you share no common language, you speak various West African languages like Igbo, Akan, or Fanti, and they speak in Arakambas-Tungba. Initial communication relies entirely on gestures and intention. You drop your makeshift weapons, slowly showing your empty, scarred hands. You point back toward the sea, miming the violence of the storm and the breaking of chains. This visible, shared understanding of maritime disaster and slavery is the first fragile bridge. Historians still argue whether this initial encounter was primarily peaceful or involved violent skirmishes, but the outcome is that the shipwrecked Africans were eventually granted a tense, conditional reprieve. It's important to remember that the Kalinago were themselves deeply engaged in a long-standing conflict. Against the British and French who sought to plant sugar and conquer the island, they recognized a potential ally, or at least a new resource for fighting their established enemies. A quirky tidbit is that the Kalinago already had a small population of escaped, enslaved Afrikaans Maroon communities who had integrated into their villages decades before your arrival. This means you weren't completely unprecedented. You were joining a pre-existing tradition of island resistance. This earlier group, sometimes referred to as Red Caribs due to their deeper integration and pigment use, paved the way for the accommodation of your larger, more recently arrived community. The Kalinago offer you a basic agreement. You can stay, but you must respect their authority, their customs, and most importantly, you must join them in the defense of the island against the European encroachment. You assent readily. To you, this is not just a strategic alliance. It is a chance to define yourself on your own terms, away from the brutal calculus of the plantation system. You are trading one set of hardships, the constant threat of re-enslavement, for another, life in the difficult, resource-scarce interior under the demanding eye of the established inhabitants. But this new hardship carries the immense reward of liberty. You begin the long, difficult process of cultural exchange. You learn to recognize the plants of the forest, which ones are food, which are medicine, and which are deadly. You are taught how to build the sturdy, thatched houses of the Kalinago and how to hunt the elusive oguti and birds of the interior. In return, you bring your own knowledge, specialized agricultural techniques, ironworking if you can salvage any scraps, and, crucially, sophisticated organizational structures rooted in the highly centralized kingdoms of West Africa. You teach them new rhythms, new styles of music, and new ways of looking at the land. You observe the Kalinago women playing a central role in both agriculture and social structure, a common trait in Arawak cultures. You see that gender roles are defined but respected, and you note the strict hierarchy within their communities. You, the newly arrived African, are placed into this existing structure. This isn't just merging, it's synthesizing, a biological and cultural fusion happening under the intense pressure of survival. You might chuckle at the irony. The Europeans wanted you to grow sugar for them in the sun, and now you are hiding in the shade, learning to grow cassava and defend a frontier. It's a massive, delicious middle finger to the entire system. You realize this integration is happening at speed because the threat is constant. The British and French, though kept mostly at bay by the Kalinago's ferocity, are always circling, always probing. They see the fertile, rich soil of St Vincent, and they see profit. They see you, the Black African, and they see stolen labor. Your survival depends on this complex, fragile, and absolutely essential partnership with the indigenous population. This shared enemy creates a profound, unified purpose. You are quickly moving from being a group of refugees to being a political force, the first Maroon community, to effectively merge with an indigenous nation to create a recognized collective front against European power. The integration you are experiencing is less like mixing two distinct streams and more like creating an entirely new river delta where the waters blend and diverge simultaneously. This intense cultural synthesis gives rise to a new name, a new identity, one that signifies both resistance and heritage, the Black Carib. You begin to understand what this name means in the context of the island's political landscape. Mainstream historical fact dictates that the term Black Carib was the name given by the Europeans initially, the French, to this new population, to distinguish them from the yellow or red Caribs, the indigenous Kalinago, who had less African This distinction was an attempt by colonial powers to categorize and, eventually, divide the unified front of resistance. But for you, the person living through this, the name means something much more profound. It represents a dual inheritance. You see this synthesis in every aspect of life. Look at the children born in the mountains during this period. They are learning the Kalinago language, rich with Arawak roots, but overlaid with African grammatical structures and lexical borrowings. They hear the hypnotic drum rhythms of West Africa blending seamlessly with the ceremonial dances of the Kalinago. Their diet is a mashup. West African yams and plantains grown alongside the traditional Kalinago cassava bread. This hybridization is practical, adaptive, and utterly unique in the Caribbean. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that the Kalinago had a specific linguistic feature, where men and women traditionally spoke slightly different versions of the language, reflecting older historical influences. The newly merged Black Carib language, Garifuna, eventually adopted many of these indigenous linguistic complexities, folding in African words for tools, food, and religious concepts. Creating a truly layered historical archive in the form of spoken word, you find yourself adapting your tongue, using Kalinago terms for navigation and agriculture, and African terms for spiritual practice and social organization. You begin to recognize the power dynamics in this relationship. While the shipwrecked Africans provided a massive boost in population, military discipline, and a hardened will to fight the Europeans, the Kalinago held the political legitimacy. As the original inhabitants, they knew the terrain intimately and possessed the long-standing infrastructure of resistance. The leadership structure, initially dominated by Kalinago chiefs, gradually shifted to accommodate leaders of African descent, particularly as the Black Carib population began to outnumber the pure Kalinago population in some regions. This transition was not always smooth. There were internal frictions, rivalries, and debates over strategy and distribution of resources. Historians still argue whether the dominance of the African element eventually assimilated the Kalinago, or whether the Garifuna culture is best described as a true, equitable co-creation. It is a debate that speaks to the heart of identity and cultural continuity. But observing the reality, you see a third way, a revolutionary identity that accepts both ancestries and uses them as weapons. This cultural fusion is your greatest strength. The British are baffled. They expect to find simple runaway slaves whom they can easily subdue, or traditional savages whom they can outmaneuver. Instead, they find highly organized communities, experts at both inland forest warfare and coastal maritime raids, led by leaders who understand both European military strategy and indigenous island geography. The Garifuna, as they begin to be recognized, are an evolutionary step in resistance. You feel the pride swelling in your chest. You are no longer defined by the chains you broke. You are defined by the kingdom you are building. You are learning Kalinago canoe-making techniques, crafting fast, sleek dugouts that can outrun European sloops in the shallow coastal waters. You are combining African medicinal knowledge with indigenous herbalism, creating remedies far more effective than anything the European doctors who sometimes treated illness with crocodile dung sunscreen could conjure up. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen. The Europeans are constantly demanding that the Kalinago hand over their runaways. The Kalinago chiefs, increasingly Garifuna in appearance and lineage, issue a resounding refusal. The message is clear. There are no runaways here. There are only free people and citizens of Euromene. This collective defense transforms the island into a military state dedicated to self-preservation. You find yourself drilling, not in the rigid lines of European infantry, but in the flexible, fluid formations of guerrilla fighters, utilizing the dense vegetation as your shield and the steep valleys as your fortress. The very ruggedness of the land is now your most loyal ally, and that is where you prepare to make your stand. You are now living in the deep interior of St Vincent, or Euromene, and the island itself is less a piece of land and more a giant natural fortress. The mainstream historical fact is that St Vincent is dominated by the Soufriere volcano, which rises over 4,000 feet, creating a rugged spine of mountains running north to south. This volcanic topography, with its deep ravines, thick rainforest, and steep, easily defended slopes, proved to be the single greatest logistical nightmare for the British invaders. You trudge through the deep, wet valleys, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and blooming orchids. The soil here is incredibly rich. It's volcanic. After all, which is what attracted the Europeans in the first place, but it also means the vegetation is overwhelmingly dense. You can hide an entire village just 50 yards off a major trail, and it will be completely invisible from the air or the ground. This jungle is your cloak, your pantry, and your alarm system. Your settlements are built on strategic high ground, overlooking approaches from the coast. You've learned from the Kalinago to fortify these positions using natural materials, stone walls, camouflaged trenches, and sharpened stakes. Often treated with natural poisons, a slightly terrifying, quirky tidbit. You are now a master of the terrain. You know which trails are safe, which lead to dead ends, and which are booby-trapped for the unwary British soldier who dares to venture too far inland. The Island of Fire and Resistance truly earned its name. The constant possibility of a volcanic eruption, which was more of a low-grade fear than an immediate threat during the major periods of conflict, kept the very earth under your feet unpredictable. This geographic instability mirrored the political instability. It was a land that refused to be tamed, just like its inhabitants. The British struggled immensely with supply lines, disease, and morale in this environment. For every battle won by the British, dozens of soldiers were lost to dysentery, malaria, and exhaustion simply trying to keep up with your highly mobile forces. You, on the other hand, are adapted. Your diet, rich in local plants and medicinal teas, gives you a natural resistance to many tropical diseases that decimated the unacclimated Europeans. You observe the meticulous planning that goes into your community's defense. Look at the children. They are taught from a young age not just how to hunt, but how to listen to the forest, how a change in the call of a bird or the snap of a twig can signal an approaching patrol. Your knowledge of the land is so intimate that when the British maps say there is a river, you know exactly where the best crossing points are and exactly where the quicksand is. You might find yourself chuckling grimly at the sight of the hapless British infantry, dressed in their heavy wool uniforms, sweating profusely, trying to hack their way through vegetation that grows back overnight. Their rigid European military formations are completely useless here. They march in straight lines. You flow like water around them. When they commit a large force, you simply vanish, only to strike their vulnerable flanks or supply convoys days later, miles away. Historians still argue whether the primary factor in the Garifuna's successful resistance was their superior military organization or the protective, unforgiving terrain of St Vincent. It's a classic chicken or egg scenario. But you know the truth. The land empowered the people, and the people learned to wield the land as a weapon. Your life is organized around defense. Agricultural plots are often moved and hidden deeper in the valleys. Communication relies on complex signal drums and runners who are capable of traversing the mountains at incredible speeds. You are not just surviving, you are thriving. This autonomy means you are not dependent on external supplies, a crucial advantage when facing an enemy that controls the sea lanes. You are growing your own food, forging your own weapons, and making your own laws. You are running a completely independent state, defined by the mountains, defended by the jungle, and sustained by an unyielding desire for freedom. Every day you wake up, look at the mist-shrouded peaks, and feel the solid ground beneath your feet is a small, personal victory against the entire apparatus of European slavery. They tried to build their empires on sugar. You built yours on steep slopes and the refusal to be property. The inevitable probing and testing of your newfound sovereignty begins almost immediately. The first clashes with the British are not full-scale invasions, but cautious, aggressive attempts by colonial forces based on nearby Barbados and the Leeward Islands to establish permanent settlements, particularly on the fertile coastal plains. You watch from your hidden vantage points as small European parties try to clear land for sugarcane and build rudimentary wooden forts near the beaches. Mainstream historical fact confirms that the British, despite officially claiming St Vincent in the mid-17th century, could not effectively enforce that claim for over 100 years due to the unified resistance of the Kalinago and later the Black Caribs. These early skirmishes, taking place between the 1670s and 1720s, were characterized by European overconfidence and Garifuna tactical superiority. You participate in one of these raids, you move silently at night, your feet bare on the damp earth, merging with the shadows. Your target is a small, nascent plantation settlement that has been pushing its boundaries into the designated Carib territory. The assault is swift, brutal, and designed for maximum psychological impact. You do not seek merely to push them back. You seek to terrify them into abandoning the land altogether. The British soldiers, often green recruits or hired mercenaries, are ill-prepared for the ferocity of the attack. They are used to pitched battles on open fields or facing poorly organized rebel groups. They are not used to fighting an invisible enemy who strikes from multiple directions simultaneously, using the cover of the jungle like a second skin. Your discipline, honed by the organization of your African ancestors and the guerrilla tactics of the Kalinago, proves decisive. You overwhelm the small garrison, destroy their supplies, and torch the nascent sugarcane fields. The message sent is unmistakable. This land is not for sale and not for taking. You observe the confusion among the European survivors who flee back to their ships. They cannot understand who you are. Are you runaway slaves? Are you pure savages? You are, of course, neither. You are a disciplined military force defending your home. This successful resistance in the early phases is crucial, as it buys you decades of autonomy, time to consolidate your cultural fusion, and time to train a new generation of warriors in the unique arts of island defense. A quirky tidbit from this period is the sheer number of false reports sent back to London, exaggerating the ferocity and cruelty of the Black Caribs, largely to justify the failure of colonial governors to establish control. These reports fueled a growing European fascination and fear of the unconquered island and its ferocious inhabitants. It's almost funny how your mere existence was enough to derail the polished plans of an empire. You realize that sometimes being a nightmare to your enemy is more effective than winning 100 battles. Historians still argue whether the British failure to conquer St Vincent earlier was due to their focus on the more lucrative islands like Barbados and Jamaica, or simply a lack of commitment driven by the exceptional difficulty of fighting the Garifuna in their mountain strongholds. Either way, for you, it translates into continued freedom. As the years pass, the scale of the confrontation grows. The French, always looking for an edge against the British, begin a policy of de facto recognition, trading goods, arms, and tools with you not out of benevolence, but out of strategic self-interest. You realize you are now a pawn in a much larger global chess game between two powerful European rivals. But you are a pawn with a mind of its own, capable of moving strategically across the board. You understand that your growing power is intrinsically linked to the growing fear you instill in the British. Every successful raid, every repelled attempt at settlement, is another brick in the wall of your independent kingdom. You are building a reputation that precedes you, a reputation of being utterly ruthless in defense of your liberty, a people who preferred death to re-enslavement. This unified front, combining the tenacity of the Maroons and the territorial imperative of the Kalinago, created a force far greater than the sum of its parts, a force that Europe would soon be forced to reckon with officially. You are a growing storm on the horizon of the Caribbean empires. As the decades of skirmishing solidify your position, a distinct, towering figure emerges from the ranks of the Black Carib leadership, Joseph Chatoyer. This man is not just a chief, he is a visionary, a military strategist, and the political voice of the unified Garifuna nation. The mainstream historical fact about Chatoyer is that he rose to prominence in the mid-18th century and became the supreme military and political leader of the Black Caribs, instrumental in negotiating with and later fighting against the British. You find yourself looking up to Chatoyer, sensing the immense authority he commands, authority born not just of lineage but of proven courage and tactical genius. He embodies the perfect fusion of your two founding cultures. He possesses the commanding presence and organizational skills rooted in African centralized authority, seamlessly combined with a profound understanding of the land and the decentralized, fierce warrior spirit of the Kalinago. His name, often spelled Satu in the Garifuna tongue, becomes a rallying cry. Chatoyer's influence is crucial because, by this point, the British are no longer sending mere exploratory patrols. They are sending serious, well-equipped military expeditions designed to claim the best agricultural land along the coast. It is Chatoyer who successfully organizes the numerous, often rival, Garifuna settlements into a single, cohesive military command structure. He unifies the scattered resistance under a single banner, forcing the British to confront a national resistance rather than a collection of Maroon camps. You observe him directing military strategy. He rarely engages in large fixed-position battles, recognizing the superior firepower of the British artillery. Instead, his strategy is one of relentless harassment, ambush, and tactical retreat into the impenetrable interior. He turns every mountain pass into a killing zone, every river crossing into a gauntlet. His motto, tacitly understood by all, seems to be, "The jungle is our arsenal, and patience is our greatest weapon." A quirky tidbit is that while Chatoyer was recognized as the principal leader by the British and French, his internal political position was far more complex. He was often engaged in delicate diplomacy to maintain the fragile coalition between different Garifuna regional chiefs and the remaining Yellow Carib villages who were sometimes wary of his growing authority. He was not a king in the European sense, but a powerful paramount chief whose power relied on continuous consensus and military success. Managing the politics of a nascent kingdom built on two distinct cultures, that's a much harder job than just fighting the British, you realize. Historians still argue whether Chatoyer's political success was due more to his innate charisma or the sheer existential threat posed by the British, which naturally drove the Garifuna to centralize power. Regardless, under his leadership, the Garifuna achieved their first major political victory. Chatoyer is astute enough to exploit the geopolitical rivalry between Britain and France. When the French briefly capture St Vincent during the American War of Independence, 1779-1783, Chatoyer's forces actively cooperate with them. You see the Garifuna forces acting as vital scouts and shock troops, helping the French take key British positions. This alliance with the French, though temporary and transactional, provides the Garifuna with a steady supply of European arms, including muskets and gunpowder, leveling the playing field significantly. You realize that Chatoyer is playing a long game. He is not fighting for the French or the British, he is fighting for the Garifuna nation. His strategy is to leverage external powers to secure internal sovereignty. After the French victory, Chatoyer ensures that the new French administration respects the territorial boundaries of the Garifuna, which the British had been actively violating. He is a statesman of remarkable clarity, proving that the rebels who escaped slavery were not just warriors, but sophisticated political agents capable of navigating the treacherous waters of 18th-century international relations. His presence alone galvanized the entire community, transforming them from a defensive alliance into an offensive national force. The political reality you are navigating is dictated entirely by the deep-seated animosity between Great Britain and France, who view the Caribbean not as a collection of islands, but as a chessboard for global dominance. You, the Garifuna, are simply the most unpredictable piece on that board. The mainstream historical fact is that throughout the 18th century, the Garifuna people consistently leveraged the rivalry between the French and the British. The French, who held nearby islands like Martinique, often adopted a more pragmatic approach toward the Garifuna, recognizing their immense military strength and strategic value in undermining British efforts on St Vincent. You witness this complex relationship unfold. French agents, sometimes disguised as traders or even Catholic missionaries, venture into the Garifuna territory, bring crucial supplies, muskets, shot, gunpowder, and even European agricultural tools, all in exchange for a Garifuna willingness to act as a hostile buffer against the British. You understand this is a dangerous game. The French are not your friends. They are merely the lesser enemy at this moment. You accept their aid, but never their control. You maintain the absolute autonomy of your government and your land. This dynamic creates an atmosphere of constantly shifting alliances. When the British are strong, the Garifuna lean toward the French. When the French occupy St Vincent, as they did temporarily during the American War of Independence, the Garifuna maintain their own territorial boundaries, recognized by treaty, ensuring that even their French allies do not infringe on the land reserved for their nation. It's an incredibly sophisticated act of political balancing. You are using the imperial power's own greed and mistrust against them. A quirky tidbit that demonstrates this strategic maneuvering. Some Garifuna chiefs learned to speak French fluently to negotiate directly, cutting out interpreters who might misrepresent their intentions. This linguistic dexterity allowed them to read French documents and correspondence, giving them an advantage in diplomatic talks and ensuring they were not being fooled by temporary promises. Imagine the sight: a powerful, dark-skinned chief standing in the middle of a jungle clearing, negotiating terms with a powdered French colonel in perfect Parisian French. You probably wouldn't survive the cultural shock of that meeting. This French complication also introduces internal divisions within the Garifuna ranks. Some factions advocate for closer ties with the French, believing they offer a more permanent shield against British expansion. Other, more conservative leaders insist on complete isolation, distrusting all Europeans equally. This is a critical point. Unity is hard-won, and the French alliance is a constant source of debate, risking the collapse of the unified front that Joseph Chatouillier worked so hard to establish. Historians still argue whether the French materially prolonged the Garifuna independence by supplying arms, or if the Garifuna's inherent tactical skills would have allowed them to resist the British for just as long, regardless of the European aid. The truth, you realize, lies in the synergy. French arms combined with Garifuna will equal over a century of successful defiance. You realize the French alliance is a double-edged sword. While the weapons are essential for defense, the French connection provides the British with propaganda material. The British paint the Garifuna not as a sovereign people defending their land, but as French-led rebels or seditious instruments of the European enemy. This framing allows the British to treat the conflict as an extension of the European war, justifying brutal military measures against what they frame as a hostile, foreign-supported force rather than an indigenous nation. The critical lesson here is that you, the Garifuna, are forced to operate in a moral gray zone. You accept help from enslavers to maintain the freedom you wrested from other enslavers. It's a brutal calculation, but one necessary for survival. Every musket received from a French ship is a means of ensuring that the British never managed to convert your mountains into sugar fields. You maintain your cultural core, your independent governance, and your military discipline, while outwardly engaging in the deadly, sophisticated diplomatic dance of 18th century imperial politics. The years of skirmishing and strategic alliances eventually lead to a stunning, formal recognition of your strength. You gather with your fellow Garifuna warriors, chiefs, and elders to hear the terms of the Treaty of 1773, a document that represents a monumental victory for an autonomous, formerly enslaved population over a major European power. The mainstream historical fact is that the Treaty of 1773, signed between the British Crown and the Garifuna, referred to as the Black Caribs in the document, officially ended the First Carib War and was forced upon the British by the incredible difficulty of subduing the Garifuna in the mountains. The British had deployed large forces but suffered heavy casualties from fighting and disease, making the cost of conquest too high to justify at that time. You stand there, listening to the terms being translated. The treaty formally ceded a significant portion of the island's most fertile, accessible land along the east and west coasts to the British for plantation development. That loss stinks. It's the land the British wanted most, and you know it will soon be covered in sugarcane. But the immense, unparalleled victory lies in the recognition of the remaining interior and northern territories. The treaty explicitly delineated boundaries for the Garifuna Reserve, which was recognized as the territory of the Black Caribs. Crucially, the treaty stipulated that the Garifuna were to be considered subjects of the British Crown, but they were allowed to retain their own laws, governance, and effective autonomy within their designated boundaries. This is a revolutionary outcome. Think about it. An army of runaways and indigenous allies had negotiated a formal peace treaty with the largest global empire, securing their right to self-govern on their own terms. This wasn't merely a truce, it was a staggering legal acknowledgement of your nationhood. You are not a tribe, a village, or a band of rebels. You are a political entity with defined borders. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that the British negotiators, eager to secure peace, were not entirely honest with the Garifuna about the long-term implications of being subjects of the British Crown. The Garifuna interpreted this as a loose protection against other European powers, but the British saw it as a legal loophole to eventually impose greater control. The entire treaty, you realize, is a piece of paper built on a foundation of mutual mistrust and exhaustion. This period following the treaty, roughly from 1773 to 1795, is a golden age of sorts for your nation. You use this peace to consolidate your infrastructure. You develop a sophisticated internal trade network, linking the fishing villages on your coast to the agricultural and military strongholds in the interior. Your economy is self-sufficient and remarkably resilient, entirely independent of the British plantations that are now visible on the southern plains. However, the peace is inherently unstable. The British colonists, watching the Garifuna thrive on the adjacent land, are perpetually hungry for more. They constantly test the borders, complaining to the Crown that the Garifuna are harboring runaway slaves from their plantations, a charge that is, admittedly, often true. You can't exactly turn away people seeking the freedom you fought so hard to secure. Historians still argue whether the Treaty of 1773 was a genuine attempt by the British to coexist, or merely a strategic pause to rebuild their forces and wait for a more opportune moment to seize the rest of the island. Observing the constant encroachment and the clear military buildup in the British sector, you lean heavily toward the latter. Despite the British presence, your society flourishes. You have formal systems of justice, military training for all young men, and a deeply rooted spiritual life centered on the sea and the ancestors. You watch as Joseph Chatuyur solidifies his authority, acting as the de facto sovereign of the Garifuna Reserve. This treaty, while ceding some land, secured your most valuable asset, your identity and your freedom. You have effectively built an independent state within the political geography of the British Empire, a true kingdom of Maroons and indigenous people who refuse to submit. You look at the British side of the island and see the tyranny of the cane. You look at your side and see the towering peaks of freedom. It is a stark contrast, and you know deep down that the paper peace won't last forever. Empires are not known for respecting the sovereignty of smaller, less equipped neighbors, no matter what agreements they sign. It's like asking a crocodile to respect a no-fishing sign when you accidentally pitched your tent next to the water. You probably would unsurvive that mistake for long. With the Treaty of 1773 formally establishing your boundaries, you are now living in an independent kingdom in all but the formal European sense of the word. You have secured what is perhaps the most difficult prize, self-determination in the face of empire. The mainstream historical fact is that the Garifuna maintained a robust and centralized system of governance within their reserve, effectively operating as a sovereign nation. They controlled immigration, established internal laws, levied taxes or tributes, and, most critically, maintained a standing military force dedicated solely to defense. This level of autonomy was virtually unheard of for any non-European entity in the Caribbean at the time, particularly one rooted in an escaped slave community. You look around your settlement in the interior, and you see a society organized not by desperation, but by design. Your governance structure is a fascinating blend of indigenous and African political models. The core is the Dug, or Council of Elders and Chiefs, led by paramount figures like Joseph Chatuyur. Decisions are made through prolonged discussion and consensus, reflecting the indigenous tradition. However, the military organization, logistics, and resource distribution often display the hierarchical and effective structures reminiscent of West African kingdoms. This dual system ensures both widespread popular buy-in. Everyone feels heard and efficient. Disciplined action: when a decision is made, it is followed immediately. You are building houses, not temporary shelters. You are planting perennial crops, not just quick harvests. You are investing in the long-term future of your nation. The infrastructure includes well-maintained trails linking the different settlements, signal posts for rapid communication, and secure storage for arms and provisions. A quirky tidbit is how the Garifuna financed this independence. They were skilled traders, navigating the seas in their canoes and trading with neighboring islands, often circumventing British trade restrictions. They traded their surplus produce, expertly crafted canoes, and small amounts of indigenous gold for European goods like tools, metal pots, and, most importantly, firearms and powder. This robust, clandestine economy provided the material foundation for your kingdom. You realize the profound meaning of this autonomy? In the adjacent British territories, life is defined by the arbitrary will of a plantation owner or a colonial governor. Here, your life is defined by your laws and your will. When someone commits a transgression, they face the judgment of the Doog, not a distant, incomprehensible European court. Justice is swift and focused on community repair, not punitive extraction. This self-sufficiency also extends to your spiritual life. The religious practices are a rich tapestry, combining Kalinago reverence for the spirits of the land and sea with West African ancestor veneration. You often participate in communal rituals, ensuring the ancestors are pleased and the community is protected. This deeply embedded spiritual and cultural life provides an invisible, unbreakable shield against the psychological warfare of colonialism. You might find the British troops across the border praying to their distant European God while you are praying to the ancestors who are right here in the rustling of the leaves and the crashing of the waves. Much more immediate presence, you might joke. Historians still argue whether the de facto independent state achieved by the Garifuna was truly a sovereign kingdom or simply the most successful example of a maroon society in the Americas. For you, living through it, the label matters less than the reality. You are free, you are governed by your own people, you make your own decisions. That is the essence of nationhood. The pressure, however, is constant. The British refuse to accept this permanent feature in their Caribbean landscape. They view your existence as an intolerable example to the enslaved populations on their sugar islands. Every free Garifuna person is a living, breathing testament to the lie that black people are meant to be property. The entire edifice of the plantation economy rests on the assumption of absolute control, and your independent kingdom proves that control is, at best, conditional. You know this period of relative peace is only the quiet before a far greater storm, as the British will inevitably move to eliminate this dangerous, inspiring anomaly. Within this independent kingdom, the quality of life you experience is a testament to the resilience and ingenious adaptation of your people. Your existence is defined by the necessity of self-sufficiency and the absolute freedom from the plantation clock. Mainstream historical fact emphasizes that the Garifuna settlements in the interior were masters of subsistence agriculture. Focusing on a wide array of crops that provided nutritional resilience and redundancy, unlike the monoculture of sugar that defined the European settlements, you cultivated a diversity of plants, ensuring that the failure of one crop wouldn't lead to starvation. You grow cassava, which you process into the staple Ariba bread, yams, plantains, maize, and various fruits and vegetables. This complex system is the economic backbone of your autonomy. You spend a day in one of the mountain strongholds. These are not merely camps, they are established villages. The houses are sturdy, built from locally sourced timber and thatch, often clustered around a communal clearing, or dabu, where important meetings and ceremonies take place. The entire settlement is perfectly camouflaged, built with a deep respect for the natural contours of the land. You observe the complex social structures. Life is communal, characterized by shared labor and mutual defense. Women play a particularly crucial role, not only in the domestic sphere, but also as the primary agricultural producers and preservers of the Garifuna language and culture. They are the guardians of the seed bank and the nutritional health of the community. The men, while contributing to farming, are heavily focused on hunting, fishing, canoe building, and most importantly, military readiness. A quirky tidbit that illustrates this resourcefulness. The Garifuna developed sophisticated methods for processing cassava, a root that is highly toxic if not prepared correctly. This process involves grating the root, pressing out the deadly prussic acid using a woven tube press called a rugama, and then baking the starch into large, durable flatbreads. This mastery of a difficult food source demonstrates a sophisticated level of transferred knowledge, likely combining Arawak techniques with African agricultural experience. You wouldn't survive dinner if you didn't have this specialized knowledge. Your day is structured around the demands of the environment and the need for defense. You might spend the morning fishing in the rapid mountain streams, or venturing to the coast for deep-sea fishing, knowing you must always watch for British naval patrols. The afternoon is dedicated to communal fieldwork or practicing with weapons, honing your skills with a musket, spear, or bow. Evenings are dedicated to storytelling, music, and the transmission of history, the essential glue that holds your disparate community together. The drums are central to this, speaking a language of rhythm that transcends the differences between your African and Kalinago heritages. You realize that these settlements are the ultimate maroon communities, not just hiding places, but fully functioning societies that have rejected the entire premise of European life. They are running a parallel anti-colonial society. Historians still argue whether the African or the Kalinago social and political structures were more dominant in the final, unified Garifuna society. From your perspective, it's a living, functional hybrid. The concepts of lineage and deference to elders, strong in both cultures, are the guiding principles. The freedom you taste every day is sweeter because it is earned by collective effort and defended by personal courage. You look out from your settlement across the deep green valleys. Below you, the British are trying to impose order with lines of cane and the rigid schedules of slavery. Up here, you live by the sun, the rain, and the rhythm of the ancestors. Your food is grown on free soil, your children are born free, and your history is written by your own actions. This freedom, however, is the very thing that makes your kingdom a target. It is a dangerous, powerful beacon of possibility, and the empire simply cannot allow it to shine indefinitely. The fragile peace, secured by the Treaty of 1773, shatters with the eruption of the Second Carib War. You see the warning signs long before the first shots are fired. Increased British military patrols near the border, the aggressive clearing of land right up to your treaty lines, and the constant insulting demands for the surrender of your leaders. The mainstream historical fact is that the Second Carib War formally began in 1795, driven by renewed British ambition for the lucrative lands you controlled, and fueled by the geopolitical turmoil of the French Revolution. You feel the tension building like the pressure inside the Soufriere volcano. The British are no longer negotiating. They are calculating. They have watched your kingdom grow strong, self-sufficient, and defiantly free for over 2 decades. Your continued existence is a fundamental threat to the stability of their entire Caribbean empire, particularly as revolutionary fervor the intoxicating ideas of liberty and equalities. Sweeping across the Atlantic from France, the spark that ignites the conflict is the arrival of French revolutionary agents and military aid. The French, now under the radical banner of the Republic, see a perfect opportunity to destabilize and bleed their British rivals. They provide the Garifuna with a large shipment of arms, artillery, and a small contingent of French officers and volunteers, all arriving in early 1795. This French revolutionary connection, which we'll explore further, gives you the Garifuna, the material confidence to challenge the British one last time. Led by Joseph Chatoyer, you launch a coordinated offensive. The goal is not just defense, but the complete expulsion of the British from St Vincent. You see the Garifuna forces, now better armed than ever, sweeping down from the mountains, overwhelming isolated British military posts and routing colonial militias. The initial phase of the war is a spectacular success, demonstrating the years of military planning and preparedness that Chatoyer orchestrated. You participate in the liberation of much of the island, pushing the British forces into a few heavily fortified coastal positions, most notably the capital, Kingstown. A quirky tidbit is that the Garifuna forces, in a demonstration of their cultural fusion, often used traditional Kalinago war horns made from conch shells to signal attacks, combining the eerie ancient sound with the sharp crack of modern French muskets. This blend of the old and the new was terrifying to the British, who saw it as proof of a barbaric yet technologically equipped enemy. You realize this is not just a territorial war, it is an ideological one. You are fighting for the right of self-determination, inspired by the very principles of liberty the French are touting, even if they are your transactional allies. The British, on the other hand, are fighting to uphold the fundamental principle of racial hierarchy, and the right to property, the property being your land, and implicitly, people like you. Historians still argue whether the Second Carib War was primarily an indigenous Maroon resistance movement or an extension of the European Revolutionary Wars manipulated by the French for the British. It was definitely the latter, giving them the justification to be utterly ruthless. The initial success of the Garifuna offensive shocks the British command. They lose control of their settlements, their plantations are destroyed, and their forces are confined. For a brief, intoxicating period, it seems entirely possible that the Garifuna will succeed in driving the British off the island forever. The mountains belong to you, the coastal plains are being reclaimed, and the British flag is replaced by the fierce, defiant spirit of Euromene. But you know the empire will respond not with a simple counterattack, but with an overwhelming, decisive show of force. When an empire feels its foundations shaking, it rarely holds back. You brace yourself for the massive reinforcements you know are already sailing across the Atlantic. This is the moment your long-held dream of a free nation will either be secured or tragically extinguished. Your successful offensive, the liberation of the coastal regions, and the confinement of the British to a few strongholds brings a terrifying and defining moment to the Second Carib War. The mainstream, historical fact is that the turning point, the tragic, pivotal event that severely hampered the Garifuna cause was the death of Joseph Chatoyer in March 1795. A few months into the renewed conflict, you are present either directly or through the frantic reports passed through the lines. When the confrontation takes place, the British, desperate to break the Garifuna morale and shatter their unified command, launch a targeted counterattack near the heights of Dorsetshire Hill, overlooking Kingstown. They send a crack unit of the 46th Regiment, led by a seasoned officer named Major Alexander Leith. The battle is fierce and personal. It's fought hand-to-hand in the treacherous darkness of the hills. Chatoyer, leading his men with his characteristic bravery, engages directly with the enemy. He is tragically killed in a skirmish with Leith. The details are immediately mythologized, but the devastating fact remains: your paramount leader. The man who embodied the synthesis of your nation and orchestrated your greatest military successes is gone. The shock that ripples through the Garifuna ranks is profound. Chatoyer was more than a general. He was the spiritual anchor and the political glue that held the often fractious coalition of chiefs together. His death is a wound to the soul of the nation, while the Garifuna forces managed to repel the British counterattack that night, forcing them to retreat and hold their ground. The psychological victory belongs entirely to the British. A quirky tidbit that emphasizes his importance. Chatoyer was known for his distinct attire, often combining European military coats and hats likely gifts from the French or captured gear with traditional Carib shell adornments and African fabrics. His appearance was a powerful symbol of the unified, yet modernized, resistance. His death was immediately reported back to London with immense satisfaction, as the British recognized that eliminating him was more valuable than winning a dozen skirmishes. You see the immediate military consequence, while the remaining chiefs, particularly his brother and other lieutenants, continued the fight with incredible ferocity. The centralized command structure begins to fray. Decisions become slower. There are debates over strategy. Some argue for continuing the siege of Kingstown, others for a strategic retreat back to the impenetrable mountains. The lack of Chatoyer's singular, unifying authority means the British can now focus on exploiting these natural divisions. Historians still argue whether the Garifuna could have ultimately won the war if Chatoyer had survived to lead them through the final, brutal stages. His strategic acumen was irreplaceable, and his death allowed the British to regain the initiative and bring in massive reinforcements without fear of a coordinated, decisive Garifuna action. The period immediately following Chatoyer's death becomes a grinding war of attrition. You continue to fight with the fury of a wounded lion, but the strategic landscape has shifted. The British, emboldened and recognizing the weakened command structure, begin pouring thousands of veteran troops into St. Vincent. These are not the green recruits of the First Carib War. These are seasoned soldiers from the European theaters, and they are brought in with a singular, clear mandate: eliminate the Garifuna threat entirely. You realize the profound price of freedom. The most capable, indispensable leader of your nation has been taken, but the fight does not end. His legacy, the independent kingdom he helped build, now becomes the very thing you must defend. The struggle transforms from one of tactical victory to one of sheer survival, fueled by the memory of the man who dared to challenge an empire from a small volcanic island. You still have the power of the jungle, but now you fight not just for your land, but in honor of your fallen chief. The devastating loss of Chatoyer does not extinguish the fire of resistance. Instead, it is fanned by the revolutionary winds blowing from Europe. The French revolutionary connection becomes critical in the months following his death, giving the Garifuna a necessary strategic lifeline. The mainstream historical fact is that the French First Republic, particularly under the influence of radical figures like Victor Hugues, based in Guadeloupe, actively supported anti-British insurrections across the Caribbean, including the Garifuna uprising on St. Vincent. You witness the arrival of more French volunteers and military supplies. These are not just polite, pragmatic traders as before. These are zealots, filled with the fervor of liberté, eagle-eyed fraternit. They view the Garifuna War as a direct extension of their own global struggle against monarchy and empire. They bring with them not just muskets and cannon, but copies of revolutionary decrees, inspiring you with the promise of universal human rights, a radical concept that resonates deeply with the people who fought for freedom against the institution of slavery. The French provide more than just arms. They provide tactical expertise, especially in the use of artillery, and the construction of field fortifications, skills that the jungle-based Garifuna forces are less accustomed to. You see French engineers helping to fortify your remaining coastal positions and training your gunners. This aid allows you to transition from purely guerrilla warfare to holding strategic ground, even if temporarily. A quirky tidbit is the contrast between the French revolutionary ideals and their Caribbean reality. While they preached liberty, the French were still slaveholders on islands like Martinique, though slavery was temporarily abolished. In the French colonies in 1794, it would be reinstated by Napoleon. You, the Garifuna, know better than to trust their principles completely, yet you pragmatically accept their aid. It as a moment of cynical but necessary alliance, using the hypocrisy of one empire to fend off the aggression of another. It as like being offered a life raft by someone who just pushed you off a cruise ship. This French involvement ensures that the British cannot simply treat your conflict as a small, localized rebellion. The presence of French flags, French uniforms, and French revolutionary rhetoric forces the British to view the conflict as a major European war, diverting thousands of troops and immense resources to St. Vincent. This is exactly what the Garifuna and the French want: to make St. Vincent a costly, bloody drain on the British Empire. Historians still argue whether the Garifuna's embrace of the French Revolution's ideals was genuine, or purely strategic, whether they truly believed in the French philosophy, or simply used their army as leverage. From your vantage point, the idea of freedom liberté is certainly genuine. But you understand that all alliances with external powers are temporary and transactional. Your true allegiance is to your Ramin. The alliance does create a serious problem for the British war effort. The British are forced to fight on two fronts: the physical front against your well-armed and fiercely motivated soldiers, and the psychological front against the spread of revolutionary ideas among their own enslaved populations on St. Vincent and neighboring islands. You realize that your existence, combined with the French ideology, makes you an incredibly dangerous moral threat to the British economic system. Despite the French aid, the immense disparity in resources begins to tell. The British command in the Caribbean recognizes the strategic danger posed by your success and commits overwhelming naval power, isolating the island and cutting off French resupply routes. You watch the skies darken with the smoke of British frigates and troop transports arriving daily. You are now in a race against time, desperately trying to use the momentum of the revolution before the might of the British Empire fully descends upon your small island. the loss of Chatoyer, and the eventual cutting of the French supply lines will force you to return to the only strategy that can prolong your survival: the brutal efficiency of guerrilla warfare. With the main French supply lines interdicted by the powerful British Navy and the central command structure reeling from Chatoyer's death, your nation returns to its ancestral military strength: guerrilla warfare and the unseen enemy. This is the only way to survive the massive British military buildup. The mainstream historical fact is that the Garifuna transition back to asymmetric warfare was highly successful, utilizing the rugged terrain and dense vegetation to negate the British superiority in numbers and firepower. You become a ghost in the landscape. You move constantly, never sleeping in the same spot for more than a few nights. Your movements are restricted to the deep ravines and the highest ridges of the mountainous interior, areas the British simply cannot control or even navigate efficiently. The essence of your tactic is simple: hit hard, vanish instantly, and never stand and fight a fixed battle. You participate in the daily acts of relentless harassment that define this phase of the war. You ambush supply convoys moving from the coast to the interior British camps, cutting off food, ammunition, and medical supplies. You raid British foraging parties, turning a simple task of gathering water or firewood into a deadly risk. You strike at dawn or dusk when the light is poor and the British morale is lowest. Using the jungle's sound-dampening qualities to approach silently, you leave behind no prisoners, no wounded, and no trace of your presence, save for the chaos and terror. The impact on the British morale is devastating. You watch as the British troops, unused to tropical conditions and this form of warfare, begin to break down psychologically. They suffer more casualties from disease, exhaustion, and accidents in the unforgiving terrain than they do from pitched battles. They are constantly on edge, firing at shadows, unable to distinguish a Garifuna patrol from the rustling of the wind. The jungle itself becomes your primary weapon. It's the ultimate defense system, far more effective than any European-built fort. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the Garifuna mastery of camouflage and silence. Warriors smeared their bodies with mud and plant pigments to blend perfectly with the jungle floor and foliage, often remaining motionless for hours while British patrols walked right past them. This extreme patience and intimate knowledge of the environment made you, quite literally, the unseen enemy. Imagine the terror of a British soldier who realizes the log he just tripped over was actually a person. It's almost as bad as realizing you've run out of rations when your days from help you probably wouldn't survive that supply failure. Historians still argue whether the Garifuna's transition to a pure guerrilla campaign ultimately prolonged the war unnecessarily, or was the only viable military option left after the death of Chatoyer. From your perspective, it is the fundamental duty of a free people to resist subjugation by any means necessary. You know that every single British soldier who dies from fever, every ration pack that is lost, is a victory for your independence. However, this type of warfare extracts a terrible toll on your own people. You cannot dedicate time to large-scale agriculture, meaning food supplies are constantly precarious. You rely heavily on small, hidden plots and the bounty of the forest, but the constant movement makes it hard to feed large families. The war forces you into deeper, more isolated sections of the island, separating families and stretching the social fabric of your community. You realize the British will eventually respond to your success, not with a conventional military attack, but with a strategy designed to destroy the infrastructure that supports your resistance. They cannot beat you in the jungle, so they will destroy the jungle's capacity to sustain you. You brace yourself for the British shift toward a scorched earth policy, the cruel, effective counterinsurgency tactic that will target not just your warriors, but your entire way of life. Your success in guerrilla warfare, while strategically effective, forces the British to adopt a horrifying but ultimately decisive strategy: the British counterinsurgency. They realize that a conventional military approach will never defeat you. The mainstream historical fact is that the British shifted their tactics to a systematic campaign of isolation and destruction, led by commanders who understood that the key to defeating the Garifuna was not killing warriors, but destroying the civilian infrastructure and the food supply that sustained them. You observe the change in the nature of the attacks. The British stopped chasing your patrols into the deepest jungle where they suffer the highest losses. Instead, they focused their massive influx of troops on establishing a rigid, continuous perimeter around your main mountainous territory. Their strategy is twofold: starve and displace. First, the British begin a scorched earth campaign. Large, disciplined forces, often led by the ruthless general Ralph Abercrombie, sweep through the coastal and lower mountain areas of the Garifuna Reserve, systematically burning all crops, destroying settlements, and seizing any livestock. You see the columns of smoke rising from the valleys, a sickening visual indication of the impending famine. You realize the immense cruelty of this approach. They are not fighting the soldiers. They are fighting the women, the children, and the elderly who depend on those crops. Second, they implement a strict naval blockade along the entire coast of St Vincent. This is designed to completely cut off any remaining contact with French allies and, more importantly, to prevent your fishing parties from bringing in much-needed protein. The sea, once a source of sustenance and escape, becomes a prison wall patrolled by heavily armed British warships. You are now fighting on two new fronts, against the British soldiers and against hunger and sickness. The jungle, while offering protection, becomes a scarce provider. Food stores dwindle rapidly. You notice the visible impact on your community. The children are thinner, the elderly are weaker, and the fighters, while still fiercely defiant, are running on desperation. A quirky tidbit that emerges from this brutal phase is the Garifuna's ingenuity in hiding food. They began burying caches of dried cassava and preserved meats in complex, often watertight, underground pits, marking the locations with subtle, naturally occurring landmarks that only they could recognize. This allowed some communities to withstand the starvation tactics longer than the British anticipated. But the scale of the destruction eventually overwhelmed even this level of planning. Historians still argue whether the physical destruction of the land or the overwhelming force of the reinforcements was the decisive factor in the British victory. But you know the answer is simpler. The British found a way to make the war impossible to sustain, even if you never lost a battle. Fighting the enemy is one thing. Fighting starvation and the elements is quite another. It's a logistical war, and the empire, with its endless resources, holds the upper hand. As the war drags into its second year, the Garifuna forces, though still undefeated in open battle, are forced into smaller, increasingly isolated pockets of resistance in the highest, most inaccessible parts of the island. You are running out of powder, running out of medicine, and running out of strength. The spirit of resistance remains unbroken, but the physical reality of survival is tightening like a noose. You know the end is approaching, not with a roar, but with the quiet, desperate whimpers of the hungry. Your freedom, bought with so much blood and effort, is being slowly suffocated by the cold, calculated strategy of the British military machine. The long, agonizing attrition of the British counterinsurgency brings you, finally, to the last desperate stand. The mainstream historical fact is that the Garifuna forces, weakened by starvation, disease, and the constant pressure of massive British reinforcements, were eventually forced to surrender after a final series of battles that culminated in the siege of the last fort in late 1796. You are among the remaining Garifuna and French soldiers who have retreated to a final, rugged stronghold. This is not a grand European-style fortress, but a heavily fortified natural position, likely on the steep slopes near the north coast, perhaps in the vicinity of the Soufriere volcano itself. You have scraped together the last of your gunpowder. You are rationing the last meager food stores, and your ranks are decimated by months of fighting and deprivation. The spirit is willing, but the body is failing. The British approach this siege with a cold, calculated patience. They know you cannot be dislodged by direct assault without heavy casualties, and they know you are running out of everything. They simply surround the position with overwhelming force, setting up artillery to maintain a constant grinding bombardment and waiting for hunger to do their work for them. You hear the ceaseless thud of cannon fire, echoing off the mountainsides at terrible drumbeat to the end of your independence. You see your comrades falling, not just to British bullets, but to the fevers and the general weakness that starvation brings. The final days are defined by a desperate, agonizing internal debate among the remaining leaders. Can you break out and continue the guerrilla campaign? The consensus is grim. The population is too depleted, and the food sources are too thoroughly destroyed across the island. To continue fighting is to condemn every remaining man, woman, and child to death by slow starvation. The eventual decision to surrender is a moment of profound, heartbreaking capitulation. It is not the surrender of cowards, but the sacrifice of those who choose the possibility of survival for their people over a final, glorious, but ultimately futile stand. You watch as the surviving chiefs walk out under a flag of truce, laying down the arms that had secured your freedom for over a century. The French Revolutionary Volunteers, if any remain, are separated. They face execution or prison as foreign enemies. You, the Garifuna, face a far more ambiguous and terrifying fate. A quirky tidbit that emerges from the surrender is the immense relief felt by the British troops. Many were veteran soldiers who had served in harsh conditions, but they universally described the campaign against the Garifuna as the most difficult and demoralizing they had ever experienced. They considered your warriors to be among the most formidable light infantry fighters they had ever faced. Your defeat was achieved through logistics and attrition, not battlefield superiority. Historians still argue whether the surrender was a strategic error, and if small bands of Garifuna could have continued a long-term low-level resistance, perhaps eventually forcing the British to negotiate a new internal settlement. But you know that the British mandate was absolute. The Garifuna nation, as an independent entity, had to be dismantled and removed. As you are marched down the steep slopes toward the coast, defeated but unbroken, you look back at the mountains. They are no longer your fortress, but a tomb for your fallen comrades and the dreams of a free kingdom. The true horror, you realize, is not the loss of the war, but the fear of what the victors will do now. They did not fight to secure your land. They fought to eliminate you as a political and cultural entity, and your fate is entirely in their cruel hands. Your greatest fears are immediately realized. The British military command, determined to eliminate the Garifuna as a political threat, implements a devastating plan of mass deportation. The mainstream historical fact is that following the surrender, thousands of Garifuna surviving warriors, their families, the elderly, and children were rounded up and forcibly marched to the coast, where they were loaded onto ships and transported to the small, barren, uninhabited island of Belize. You are one of those prisoners. The march to the coast is a brutal, humiliating ordeal. You are surrounded by heavily armed British soldiers, the very men you spent years outmaneuvering in the jungle. The soldiers treat you with a mixture of resentment, fear, and contempt, viewing you not as noble enemies, but as defeated rebels who cost the Empire too much time and treasure. The journey to Belize is short but terrifying. Belize is a small, dry island in the Grenadines, part of the St Vincent chain, just a few miles southeast of the main island. It is deliberately chosen for its lack of resources and its ease of isolation. You are dumped onto the shore along with an estimated 4,000 to 5,000 other Garifuna people. Look around at the scene of despair. The island is entirely unsuitable for sustaining such a massive population. There is very little fresh water, scant natural food, and absolutely no existing shelter. You realize instantly that this is not a temporary detention. It is a calculated act of systematic neglect designed to break your spirit and drastically reduce your numbers before the final forced removal from the Caribbean. The British build a rudimentary stockade or enclosure, but their main goal is simply containment. They provide minimal rations, often insufficient and of poor quality, and rely on the natural scarcity of the island and the ensuing diseases to do the rest of the work. You are suddenly thrust back into a fight for survival, one far crueler than the war itself, because here, you cannot fight back against hunger or fever. A quirky tidbit that demonstrates the ruthlessness of the British is that the island was previously used only for grazing goats, and as a source of guano seabird, droppings used as fertilizer. It was considered worthless for plantation agriculture, making it a perfect, disposable prison island. The contrast between your independent mountain kingdom, rich with resources, and this dusty, desolate confinement is jarring and deeply demoralizing. Historians still argue whether the British intentionally planned the mass death on Belize as a form of extermination, or if it was simply the result of logistical incompetence combined with indifference. But for you, the person living through this, the result is the same. The conditions are inhumane and deadly. Despite the desolation, the Garifuna structure and spirit remains intact. You see elders desperately trying to organize the community, sharing the meager rations, organizing work details to search for any source of potable water, and, most importantly, conducting the traditional ceremonies to mourn the dead and maintain spiritual cohesion. The drumming and the singing, though muted by sadness and weakness, continue a final defiant whisper of culture in the face of annihilation. You are witnessing a deliberate attempt to erase your nation. Yet, even in this living hell, you find strength in the collective memory of the mountain stronghold. Remember those sophisticated structures you built. You refuse to let go of the identity you fought so fiercely to forge. You wait, day after day, watching the numbers shrink, knowing that every life lost is a victory for the people who seek to own the very land you bled for. This tiny, cursed island becomes the crucible of the Garifuna nation, the place where the weak perish, and the truly resilient are tested for their next unpredictable journey. The confinement on Baliso quickly transforms into a nightmare of starvation and disease. You live through the horrific realization that the war did not end with the surrender. It merely changed its form, becoming a battle against invisible enemies' pathogens, dehydration, and hunger. The mainstream historical fact is that within just 6 months of the Garifuna's arrival on Baliso, nearly half of the estimated 4,000 to 5,000 prisoners died due to the appalling conditions, making this period one of the most tragic demographic disasters in Garifuna history. You are surrounded by the constant evidence of this catastrophic loss. The inadequate British rations are quickly consumed, and the island yields very little to forage. Saltwater surrounds you, but fresh water is critically scarce, leading to chronic dehydration and dysentery, which rapidly sweeps through the crowded, unsanitary encampment. You watch as fevers, likely typhoid or other waterborne diseases, take the weakest first: the young, the elderly, and the previously wounded. The psychological impact is almost as deadly as the physical hardship. You are forced to bury your loved ones in shallow graves in the dry, unforgiving soil. The constant smell of death hangs over the encampment, a relentless reminder of your defeated status. Yet, in the face of this systematic annihilation, you witness extraordinary acts of human compassion and organization. You see women and elders prioritizing the health of the remaining children and young adults, knowing they represent the only hope for the future of the nation. They use what little traditional knowledge of medicine remains, crushing roots and boiling leaves found on the arid island, to treat the sick, even though the lack of basic nutrition undermines every attempt at healing. A quirky tidbit that encapsulates this period is the sheer number of documented escapes. Despite the close guard of British soldiers and the seemingly inescapable nature of the small island, numerous Garifuna attempted to swim or paddle makeshift rafts the short distance to St Vincent or other islands. While many were recaptured or drowned, the continuous trickle of escapees demonstrated that the will to resist had not been broken, even by this calculated cruelty. Historians still argue about the exact number of deaths on Baliso, with estimates ranging from 2,000 to over 3,000, underscoring the severity of the loss. Regardless of the precise figures, the population was halved. The British, in their attempt to secure a sugar island, had inadvertently created a mass grave. The conditions on Baliso serve a deliberate purpose for the British. The massive mortality rate simplifies their logistical problem: fewer people to deport, fewer mouths to feed, and a diminished threat. When the British officials finally arrive to assess the survivors, they are not motivated by pity, but by they see a population that has been severely chastened and reduced, and they deem the remaining survivors ready for the next, final phase of their elimination strategy. You feel the weakness in your own body, but you also feel the cold, hard resolve of the survivors. Those who endure Baliso are the fittest, the most resilient, the ones forged in the furnace of war and the crucible of starvation. You realize that you have passed the ultimate test. You have lost the war, lost your home, and lost thousands of your kin, but you have maintained your identity. As the British prepare the ships for the final journey, the knowledge that you survived this nightmare gives you a deep, quiet strength. You are about to be exiled, but you carry the undying spirit of Uramin with you. The death and despair of Baliso eventually give way to a final, forced march toward the unknown. The British, having significantly reduced your numbers and broken the last organized resistance, prepared the surviving Garifuna for deportation to Roatan. The mainstream historical fact is that in 1797, the approximately 2,000 to 2,500 surviving Garifuna were loaded onto several ships and forcibly removed from St Vincent, destined for the island of Roatan. Off the coast of Honduras, which was then under tenuous Spanish control, you stand on the deck of a cramped, miserable transport ship, watching the receding outline of St Vincent Island that was your independent kingdom for over a century. The sight is wrenching. You carry the trauma of Belize, the sorrow of Chetoyer's death, and the hard-won resilience of generations. The voyage is long, brutal, and humiliating. The conditions are only marginally better than the Middle Passage your ancestors endured, but this time, the journey is one of forced exile. You are crammed below deck, still suffering from the lingering sicknesses of the prison island. The British view you as a military threat, being offloaded onto their rival's doorstep, not as refugees. The British chose Roatan, a large island in the Bay Islands, for a few strategic reasons. First, it was far enough away from the core of the British Caribbean Empire to eliminate the threat of return and contagion. Second, by depositing you there, the British were essentially creating a volatile new political problem for the Spanish, who nominally controlled the area. It was a cynical act of geopolitical housekeeping. You finally arrive at Roatan, a large, lush, but sparsely settled island. The date is early, 1797. You and your fellow survivors are effectively abandoned on the shore. Left to the mercies of the Spanish authorities and the local environment, you land at Port Royal, battered and exhausted, but still alive. You have survived the storm, the war, the starvation, and the sea. You are the remnant, the seeds of the Garifuna nation. A quirky tidbit that reveals the political gamesmanship is that the British purposefully left the Garifuna well-armed upon landing. This was a deliberate act to ensure that the Garifuna would immediately clash with the Spanish and local indigenous populations, further destabilizing the Spanish position in Central America. Final dirty trick played by the British on both their rival and on you. Historians still argue whether the destination of Roatan was chosen by the British alone, or if the Spanish had some foreknowledge, perhaps seeing the potential use of the Garifuna as soldiers. Regardless, the Garifuna's immediate task is survival. Replicating the necessary steps you took on St Vincent, finding fresh water, establishing food sources, and organizing defense. However, the environment on Roatan proves to be somewhat different. It is larger, and initially, the Spanish presence is minimal, giving you a temporary reprieve. But you know that peace is fleeting. You are entering a new geopolitical theater where the Spanish are struggling to maintain their hold on the mainland against the growing British threat from nearby Belize. You realize that this deportation is not the end of your struggle, but the violent, painful beginning of a new one. You have been placed in a critical, unstable region, and your future will depend once again on your ability to quickly adapt, organize, and strategically leverage the rivalries of the surrounding European powers. The loss of your Amin is a tragedy, but the survival of your people, the carrying of your culture across this vast distance, is an act of profound revolutionary endurance. You are now the inheritors of the Sula, the ancestors of 2 continents, and you are about to plant your flag in a third. The moment of your supposed elimination unexpectedly becomes a moment of radical opportunity, courtesy of the Spanish. The mainstream historical fact is that the Spanish, initially viewing the arrival of the thousands of armed and seasoned Garifuna survivors on Roatan as a problem, quickly recognized their military value and strategic potential. You, the survivors, are not left to starve for long. Spanish officials, struggling to maintain control over the Central American mainland against constant British incursions from their base in Belize, see a powerful, disciplined, and fiercely anti-British fighting force literally delivered to their doorstep. The Spanish decision is pragmatic and surprising, rather than imprison or re-enslave you. They choose to integrate you as soldiers and settlers. This is the Spanish gambit. They offer you a deal: military service in the defense of the Spanish Main in exchange for land and freedom. You, the Garifuna, accept readily. You have just survived a war of annihilation with the British, and you are prepared to continue that fight on any terrain, under any banner, provided it guarantees your liberty and your national survival. Within months, you are transported from Roatan to the mainland coast of Honduras, near Trujillo. You are immediately put to work, not as laborers, but as soldiers and military engineers. You demonstrate your superior skills in jungle warfare, your knowledge of the coast, and your fierce loyalty to the banner that offers you the protection of freedom. You become the crucial buffer zone between the Spanish territory and the encroaching British influence. A quirky tidbit that emphasizes your immediate impact is that the Spanish found your jungle, warfare, and sailing skills to be far superior to their own colonial forces. Garifuna units were immediately deployed along the coast to counter British smuggling and raiding parties. proving highly effective in protecting Spanish interests. Your former status as the unseen enemy of the British now becomes the greatest asset of the Spanish. Historians still argue whether the Spanish were primarily motivated by military necessity or a humanitarian, though perhaps self-serving, recognition of the Garifuna as a sovereign people. For you, the reason is irrelevant. The result is everything. You are no longer prisoners or refugees. You are citizens and soldiers, defining your identity on your own terms once again. The Spanish decision inadvertently secures the survival of the Garifuna nation. By settling you along the coast of Honduras, Guatemala, and later Belize and Nicaragua, the Spanish provide you with a new large territory that allows you to rebuild your population, revive your agricultural practices, and, most importantly, maintain your cultural continuity far from the direct oversight of the British. You realize the profound irony. The British spent years and fortunes trying to eliminate you, only to inadvertently scatter the seeds of your nation across their rivals' territory. They failed to account for the fact that freedom is not dependent on geography, but on the enduring will of a people. You are not a temporary problem. You are a permanent, dynamic force. You begin to establish new settlements, mirroring the communal, self-sufficient structures of St. Vincent. Your language, your music, your rituals, and your political organization are brought ashore and immediately adapted to the Central American coast. The new land is different. The people are different, but the core identity remains the same. You are the people who refuse to be enslaved, the rebels who built a kingdom, and the survivors of Belize. You look out at the vast green coastline, no longer seeing a prison, but a new homeland waiting to be claimed and defended. The next chapter, the Great Diaspora, is about to begin. The Spanish Gambit, while offering military security, also initiates the crucial phase you now live through. The Great Diaspora begins. You cannot sustain a large population solely on the barren, disputed territory of Rotan or the Spanish military bases. You need land to plant and villages to build. The mainstream historical fact is that within a few years of arriving on Rotan in ETJOT, the Garifuna began a steady organized migration from the island to the coasts of mainland Central America, establishing permanent settlements that stretch from Belize through Guatemala and Honduras, and eventually into Nicaragua. You are part of this outward movement, a deliberate, controlled spreading of your nation's roots. You realize that your unique skills are the key to this expansion. You are master shipbuilders, skilled navigators, and expert jungle farmers. You use your traditional canoes honed on the turbulent waters around St. Vincent to traverse the coastline, scouting and establishing new villages. Your initial and most significant mainland settlement is established near Trujillo, Honduras. This location becomes the primary cultural and economic hub, the new Uramene of the Central American diaspora. From Trujillo, your people radiate outwards, seeking defensible river mouths and fertile land. You carry your cassava sticks and your fishing nets, your panted drums, and your language, ensuring that your culture is the first thing planted in the new soil. A quirky tidbit that helped facilitate this settlement is the fact that the coastal regions of Central America were largely marginalized by the Spanish, who preferred the cooler, Minoric highlands. This oversight created a large, relatively uncontested space for the Garifuna to settle and build their distinct coastal communities without immediate conflict with major Spanish population centers. You are literally filling a geographic and political void. You observe the strategic settlement pattern. You build villages that are close enough to the coast for fishing and trade, yet close enough to the jungle for immediate retreat and defense. Mirroring the successful duality of your old life on St. Vincent, the villages are communally organized, maintaining the strong social structures that survived below. Historians still argue whether the Garifuna diaspora was primarily a forced consequence of British action or a voluntary strategic movement to ensure the economic and demographic viability of the surviving nation. You know it was both. The British forced you off St. Vincent, but your own political acumen and survival instincts guided your spread across the new continent. You realize that this geographical scattering is an ingenious form of cultural insurance. If one community is threatened, the others remain untouched. Your nation is no longer contained on a single island that an enemy can blockade and burn. It is spread across hundreds of miles of coastline, making its total elimination impossible. The Garifuna Nation becomes a resilient, decentralized network of communities. You encounter new indigenous groups, Mosquito, Paya, and others, and the Spanish colonists. Your interactions are complex, sometimes involving trade and mutual respect, and at other times competition for resources. Your skills as mercenaries and settlers continue to make you valuable, especially to the Spanish, who rely on you for coastal defense and labor. Though never enslaved labor, that boundary remains absolute. The entire coastline becomes known as the Mosquito Coast, or simply the Garifuna Coast in some areas. You are no longer fighting for a single island, but for the right to exist freely on a continent. This grand migration is the ultimate vindication of the rebels who escaped slavery. They failed to hold their first kingdom, but they successfully used that very defeat to found a second, greater, and more enduring one. Your movement and settlement across Central America forces a crucial, constant effort, maintaining identity in a new world. You are no longer on the familiar slopes of St Vincent. You are now scattered across the coastline of 4 different Spanish-controlled and British-influenced colonies. The mainstream historical fact is that, despite this massive displacement and constant external pressure, the Garifuna successfully maintained their core cultural, linguistic, and spiritual identity through a deliberate strategy of cultural isolation and endogamy. You understand this task of preservation is perhaps harder than the war itself. War is defined by moments of intense action. Cultural preservation is defined by the steady, unyielding effort of daily life. Look at the new settlements you establish. They are almost exclusively Garifuna. You maintain your own community organization, ensuring that the traditional Council of Elders, the Doge, retains authority over social matters. Despite the presence of Spanish colonial officials in the nearest towns, this strategy of maintaining strong internal cohesion is your shield. You live near the coast, but you do not fully integrate into the Spanish-dominated inland towns. You trade, you serve in the military, and you work in the coastal economies. But you return home to your own language, your own food, and your own spiritual practices. A crucial component of this cultural survival is the continued dominance of the Garifuna language. While men often learn Spanish or English for trade and military service, a necessity of the new source world, the women ensure that Garifuna remains the language spoken in the home, used in the raising of children, and central to the community's spiritual life. This linguistic isolation creates a strong internal bond. A quirky tidbit that illustrates this strong cultural demarcation is the use of the Dugu ceremony. This major spiritual feast and ritual, dedicated to communicating with and appeasing the ancestors, becomes even more important in the diaspora. By strictly adhering to these ancient, complex rites, you are constantly reinforcing the collective memory of St. Vincent and the identity forged there. It is a massive undertaking, requiring huge communal effort and resources, but it serves as a powerful public declaration of cultural independence. Historians still argue whether the Garifuna's successful cultural preservation was due to their proactive isolation or to the fact that the Spanish and British simply had little interest in the remote coastal areas they occupied. It was a combination of factors, but chiefly, it was a conscious choice. You chose to remain Garifuna. You realized that your ability to adapt your traditional skills to the new environment is key. You quickly master the new fishing grounds and cultivate the similar tropical crops of Central America, ensuring economic stability. This economic self-reliance further reduces the need to assimilate into the Spanish economic structure. The legacy of the Garifuna's fight for freedom is woven into every aspect of life. You teach your children the stories of Chatoyur and the mountains of your... These stories are not just history, they are a moral code, a framework for understanding the world, that freedom is not given, it is taken, and fiercely defended. You understand that your very existence on this new coast, speaking your own language and honoring your own ancestors, is the final greatest act of defiance against the empire that tried to wipe you out. The Garifuna are no longer a people defined by a single island, but by an unwavering spirit that transcends geography. The most extraordinary feature of your enduring nation is the very sound of your conversations, your language, a historical archive. The mainstream historical fact is that the Garifuna language, Garifuna, which belongs to the Arawakan family, is a linguistic marvel. It retains strong indigenous Kalinago roots, but is heavily infused with vocabulary and syntax from various West African languages. as well as significant loans from Spanish, French, and English. It is a living map of your people's journey. You realize that by speaking Garifuna, you are not just communicating, you are reciting your entire history. When you speak about the sea, you use an Arawak-based term, reflecting the indigenous mastery of navigation and fishing. When you talk about social organization or spiritual matters, the words often carry deep structural influences from West African languages, reflecting the memory of your ancestral kingdoms. A quirky tidbit that scholars find fascinating is the sexual dichotomy within the language itself, a direct cultural legacy from the Kalinago. While the grammar is consistent, Garifuna traditionally contains a large number of vocabulary items where men and women use different words for the same concepts, for instance, certain kinship terms or words for tools. Though this dichotomy has faded in modern usage, its presence in the historical language serves as a tangible link back to the complex gendered linguistic practices of the island Caribs. This linguistic resilience is the ultimate act of cultural self-determination. The European colonial powers attempted to impose their language as Spanish in the administration, English in the trade, but your people refused to let Garifuna die. It is a language perfectly suited for the dual environment you inhabit, capable of discussing sophisticated nautical terms from the Kalinago and complex agricultural techniques from your African heritage. Historians still argue whether the African influence on Garifuna is predominantly lexical, vocabulary, or syntactic grammar. The consensus among linguists is that while the majority of the vocabulary is Arawakan, the phonology and certain grammatical features, such as the use of certain prefixes and the speed of speech, are strongly influenced by the West African languages brought over by the shipwrecked rebels. This blend makes the language sound distinctly unique and powerful. You understand the role of the language in your ongoing resistance. When you speak Garifuna in the marketplace, you create an instant boundary barrier that excludes the colonists and includes only your community. It is a secret code, a way to conduct your affairs, military or otherwise, right under the noses of the Spanish and British officials. Your language is your fortress in the diaspora. Furthermore, the Garifuna language is central to the transmission of your oral history, the Uralial, the stories of the sea, the battles on St Vincent, the horrors of Baliso. Remember that nightmare of starvation and disease. And the journeys to the mainland are all preserved and passed down through the hypnotic rhythm of the native tongue. It is through this unbroken thread of language that the identity of the Garifuna nation remains vibrant and whole, proving that culture can travel vast distances and survive the very worst attempts at annihilation. You are a living library, and every word you speak is a sentence of your history. The survival of the Garifuna is not just a matter of language or history. It is a vibrant, continuing reality expressed through a culture unconquered. You observe the enduring elements of your culture that function not as relics of the past, but as dynamic tools for communal solidarity and identity in the present. The mainstream historical fact is that Garifuna culture, particularly its music, dance, and spiritual practices, has remained remarkably intact and recognizable, serving as the primary unifying force for the scattered communities across Central America. The most visible expression of this unvanquished spirit is the punta dance. You participate in a community gathering where the rhythmic, hypnotic pounding of the prima and segunda drums dictates the pace. Punta is not just entertainment, it is a communication, a spiritual expression, and a form of social commentary. The rapid, intricate movements of the hips and feet, often performed by couples, are a direct echo of both African and indigenous dance traditions. When you dance punta, you are actively participating in the continuity of your nation. The drums themselves are central to your life. The wooden Garifuna drums, the primero lead drum, and the segunda bass drum are not mere instruments. They are voices. They speak the language of the ancestors, regulating your spiritual ceremonies and social events. They are the heartbeat of the Garifuna world. You also recognize the crucial sustaining role of the Dugu ceremony. Remember the immense effort it took to organize this on the mainland. This multi-day, elaborate feast is centered on ancestor veneration, where the community comes together to honor the spirits Gubita and seek their guidance. The Dugu is a tremendous exercise in communal logistics, demanding cooperation and shared resources, which serves to reinforce the Garifuna social contract. It's an essential political act, masquerading as a spiritual one, a powerful demonstration of self-governance. A quirky tidbit that reveals the strength of the spiritual foundation is the importance of the Bui shaman spiritual leader. The Bui acts as the intermediary between the living and the ancestors, playing a vital role in healing and guiding the community, particularly during the Dugu. Their authority often complements or even transcends that of the village chiefs, providing a non-political source of stability and cohesion rooted in tradition. Historians still argue whether the Garifuna's robust cultural traditions are solely due to their resistance to assimilation, or if their spiritual practices provided a psychological resilience that allowed them to overcome the trauma of Belize and the exile. You realize it's an integrated system. The spirituality fueled the resistance, and the successful resistance validated the spirituality. You observe the steadfast role of Garifuna women. Continuing the tradition from St Vincent, they are the primary architects of cultural survival. They preserve the language, manage the agricultural plots, and pass down the specific, complex methods of cooking. Particularly the intricate process of making ariba cassava bread and the savory fish soup, hudit. If the men were the warriors who defended the perimeter, the women are the builders who maintained the interior structure of the nation. You realize that this living culture is the true victory over the British Empire. The empire tried to destroy your physical body and your political structure, but they failed to destroy your soul. Every beat of the drum, every phrase spoken in Garifuna, every Dugu ceremony performed on the soil of Central America is a defiant shout echoing across the centuries. You are a people defined not by defeat, but by the relentless, joyous assertion of your own unique identity. The final chapter of your history is not about a defeat, but about the enduring global reach of the legacy of self-determination. Your successful cultural transplant to Central America was just the beginning of your journey. The mainstream historical fact is that the Garifuna people today number in the hundreds of thousands, maintaining a vibrant, distinct presence across 4 countries: Honduras, Belize, Guatemala, and Nicaragua, and through subsequent migrations in major diaspora communities in the United States, particularly New York and Los Angeles. You look at your community now, spanning continents, and you realize the true scale of the victory. The empire failed to erase you. Instead, you became an ineradicable transnational nation, bound by a shared language, history, and the memory of Uramin. This persistence has translated into modern political and cultural movements. In the 20th and 21st centuries, the Garifuna have focused on securing legal and cultural recognition, ensuring that the history of the Black Caribs who escaped slavery and built a kingdom is not forgotten. You see leaders organizing, advocating for land rights, and pushing for education in the Garifuna language. This is a continuation of the same fight Chatoyer lead, only now waged through international law and cultural advocacy rather than muskets and ambushes. A powerful symbol of this modern struggle is the UNESCO Declaration. A quirky tidbit is that in 2001, UNESCO recognized the language, dance, and music of the Garifuna as a masterpiece of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity. This global acknowledgement is a powerful, formal recognition that the culture born from the resistance on St. Vincent is a universal treasure of final. Ironic twist on the British attempt to wipe you out, historians still argue whether the Garifuna identity will continue to withstand the pressures of modern globalization and assimilation, particularly in the large diaspora communities. But you feel the strength of the community's resolve. The National Garifuna Council and various advocacy groups ensure that the history of your unique cultural synthesis remains central to the identity of every young Garifuna person, whether they are in Dungriga, Belize, or the Bronx, New York. You understand that your history, the story of the shipwrecked Africans, the Kalinago Alliance, the kingdom built in the mountains, the tragedy of Belize. Remember how nearly half of you died there? And the victorious diaspora is a universal lesson in self-determination. You are the living proof that a people can define their own destiny, even when faced with the most ruthless instruments of empire. You have become a beacon of cultural survival. You reflect on the long journey from the terror of the sea to the ruggedness of the mountains, to the bitterness of exile, and finally, to the establishment of new, enduring communities. Your legacy is not the gold the Europeans sought, but the freedom you secured and the vibrant culture that sustains you today. The Garifuna are not just a footnote in colonial history. You are the revolutionary main text, a kingdom that refused to die. The drumming now begins to slow, the rhythm softening, the fierce cadence of the primera drum fading gently into the deep, reassuring thrum of the segunda. Let that sound wash over you, a profound, calming rhythm that has traveled from West Africa through the heart of the Caribbean and across the coasts of Central America. This is the sound of resilience, the sound of the ancestors, the Sula watching over you. Take a deep breath. You are no longer clinging to that piece of wreckage, nor are you shivering on the desolate shores of Baliso. You are here now, safe, having borne witness to an epic of human spirit. The story of the Garifuna is a quiet testament to the enduring power of culture and the absolute, unyielding demand for freedom. Let the final echoes of the war, the hunger, and the fear dissipate. You have completed the long, arduous journey from the plantations of the past to the sovereign communities of the present. As the last light of the fire fades and the night settles around, you know this: the greatest empires fall, but the will of a people to govern themselves, to speak their own language, and to honor their own dead will always endure. Rest. Now the mountains are quiet, the sea is calm, and the ancestors are near.